Okay, this time we're going to use Revolve with a few other features included with it. We are going to, you can see how that and this turn down section of the shaft is threaded, and we've got a little keyway in here. Not that you would typically see that, but just want to show you some of the different features using work planes, using threaded features, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and recreate this shaft. I'm going to go File, New, Standard IPT, and let's set up our variables as always. So let's make this 12 inches long. Width will be our diameter, so will our thick, because the width and the thickness of the shaft is 3 inches. And let's start adding some new variables like turn down. Diameter is going to be 1.5. Turn down length is 3 inches. Let's work on our flat. So flat width is going to be 2. Flat length, or the depth of it, the depth of the cut, is going to be 1.5. And let's start out with that there. Hit S for sketch. Let's pick on this vertical plane here. And we are set in the correct orientation. I'm going to come over to line underneath of sketch, change that to a center line, construction, hit D for dimension, pull off a dimension, go to list parameters, and change that to length. Now let's start drawing our profile. I'm going to turn off the center line construction, pull off the end of the shaft, pull that up, and just kind of draw the profile. Right now we're not concerned about the dimensions. Now we can start throwing in some dimensions. And you can either type it in or you can list your parameters. I usually type things in if they're short. Again, this width could either be width or it could be thickness. Does not matter. We know that that's going to be, you can see the little circular symbol. It's going to be 3 inches. Let's come up here and go to our turned down section. This time I am going to go to the list parameters. So turn down diameter, pull off the top here, and we're going to go to turn down length and hit R for revolve. And there is the start of our shaft. So you can see that same thing. You kind of have the profile pretty much laid out as of right now. So let's do our flats next. So I'm going to kind of revolve this around. So using F4, we're going to pivot that around so we can see the bottom of it. I'm going to orient this so that it actually is showing correctly. Hit S for sketch and click on the bottom plane. You can see we've got the bottom plane selected by the little purple. Go back to that view there. I'm going to hit line. Make sure that construction isn't selected and the center line is also not selected. And draw a few lines for our flats. Now I want this to be equal. I know that both of these lines are going to be equal to each other. So now if I change one or the other, it's always going to move. So let's go ahead and change, or put a dimension for the flat width, and there we have it. So now we've got the start of the cutouts for the flats. So like, let's say you were putting a crescent wrench or a wrench on the bottom of that to turn it for one reason or another. And then hit E for extrude. Extrude out all these little sections here. We're going to go to cut, go to list parameters, and we should have flat length. Select that. There's our flats. Now let's go ahead and thread. Let's throw in some chamfers. Let's start making it look like what they would actually do on a shaft. And I used 1/8 of an inch for this turn down on the very face. Let's put in a 1/16. And there's our start. So let's go up to thread and thread the end of this shaft. And it automatically realizes that this is an 1.5" diameter, so it's going to put in what it thinks it should be, 1.5". It's an 1.5" 6 coarse thread. We could change it to a fine. Let's go ahead and do that. And you can see how that this little image here, the bitmap wrap, changes with the selection of either the coarse or the fine. I'm going to go ahead and use the fine thread for now. You can do your class 2A, 3A, so on and so forth. Most of the time you're going to be using the 2A. Select OK, and then let's put in our keyway. So using a work plane, off of the origin, find the correct plane that you're going to be working on, and then pick on the apex of the circular stub, and it'll put a work plane right on the top apex of that stub. Hit S for sketch, click on your work plane, come up to, most of the time it's going to be set as a rectangle. We want it to be a slot, and I am going to pull that off horizontally without any dimensions as of right now, and I'm going to use a coincident constraint from this endpoint to the end, and now we can start putting in dimensions. So D for dimension, pull off the width, and I don't think, yeah, I didn't put any parameters for a slot, so let's go ahead and do that. So up in the parameters, add numeric, keyway width, let's say that it's 3/8, add numeric, keyway depth, and let's actually drive this one with keyway, because most of the time you're going to see that the depth of the keyway is half of the width. So we used keyway width, which is 3/8, divided by 2. Now let's put in keyway length, and let's drive this one too. So let's go turn down length minus 0.5. So now if that turn down length ever changes, our keyway length is going to change as well. So we'll never see interferences between the two, and we'll show that. We'll change a few of these variables here in a second. So let's go done. Let's put it in a dimension, list parameters, and we want to go to keyway length. Let's delete this. Hit D for dimension, list parameters, go keyway width, and then you can see we're still green. The reason being is we're not constrained horizontally. So now let's go to a horizontal constraint. You can see that we're not in the right orientation. It's going to do it vertically instead of horizontally to the view. So we could come over here if we wanted to, rotate that, and now we can do vertical based off of the origin point. And now we're black, and it's the sketch is satisfied, and it says you can do any kind of a feature on this. So we're going to go ahead and extrude this, cut it, change the parameters to keyway depth, make sure that it's facing the right direction. Now we can see our cut, say OK, and now we have our shaft with our keyway and our flats. Let's change the material to 304, and now we have a shaft with a keyway, threaded one end, and wrench flats on the opposite end. So just for shits and giggles, let's change this turn down length and make sure that the length of the keyway changes with it. So turn down length, let's make it 1.5. Let's make it short, and there we have it. Now you could also put variables in here to like a min-max length so that it doesn't go under and it doesn't go over on the length. But we'll show you those features later on. Let's go ahead and turn off the visibility of that work plane. And for just another little example of a feature, let's go ahead and thread a hole through the flat for just shits and giggles. So we've got a simple hole, just a straight through hole. We've got a clearance hole for bolts and fasteners. We're going to use a tapped hole, and let's make it a 3/8. So I'm going to change the size to 3/8, and it's saying, okay, you want a 3/8. Do you want it to be coarse? Sure, we'll use coarse. We've got plenty of meat here. Doesn't matter. We're going to go all the way through. So you can see down here the termination, you can do a distance. So if you had a blind hole, that would be a good one to use. If you had a work plane that you had placed in here, you could go 2, but we're going to go through all. So I'm going to go ahead and pick anywhere on there. I'm going to go to sketch, and I'm going to go to a vertical because I know it's on its side. I'm going to pick here, and let's put a dimension here. Let's put a parameter inside of this without having to create one. So I'm going to go turn down length divided by 2. So now if that turn down length, this hole is always going to be centered on the width of the turn, on the flat depth. Let's go back to hole, select OK, pivot it around, and you can see your threads in there. Now granted, if you do not pick through all, which you wouldn't, you'd preferably not tap this whole entire depth, because a 3/8 hole being tapped 2 inches is just ridiculous. But one thing we could do is we could use a shoulder bolt and it being tapped on one side. So let's modify that through hole. So we'll go to the browser over here to this hole 1, right click and edit feature, and we want it to have the seat like so. And let's go a little bit deeper. Let's say that this goes 1 inch deep and say OK. So now we've got a clearance for a screw and a tapped section, and then it's just a through hole the rest of the way through. So there you have your shaft, a revolved shaft, threaded features, threaded holes, some chamfers, some work planes, and that'll do that for this one.